Hi, my name is Dr. Andrew Turkell, and I am from Calusa Veterinary Center, and I'm here to help you better understand acupuncture.
Dr. Turkell, what is canine acupuncture?
So, canine acupuncture is no different than acupuncture for people or acupuncture for horses. It's a form of complementary medicine that involves inserting thin needles into specific points, and since we're talking about canine acupuncture, into the dog's body to stimulate natural healing.
What types of veterinary acupuncture are there and how are they different?
So, veterinary acupuncture, again, is no different than acupuncture used around the world in people. And the classic form is using dry needles. So these are the little needles you're familiar with. They're about the size of a hair, very, very thin, very, very sharp. And dry needling is just using those needles in specific points. Electric acupuncture is another form. And electric acupuncture uses a low volt electricity that connects certain needles that creates a pattern of electric movement, enhancing the mechanism, so to speak, of acupuncture pathway through what we call meridians. So that's a second type called electric acupuncture. When acupuncture started, there was no electricity. So if we understand that what we're doing is moving a life force through these meridians, and the life force is what's called qi. Qi is spelled Q-I. It's a good Scrabble word. So moving these electrical it's a movement through a pathway is being enhanced by an electrical current. So the second form of acupuncture is electroacupuncture. So we have dry needles, we have electroacupuncture, and then there's a third one called aquapuncture, which is when you put a needle into a point. It's there for a few minutes, and then you take the needle out. But instead, if you put a liquid into that point, and you could put saline, or sometimes I'll use a little bit of B12, you're putting a little pressure at that point that will remain at that point after you take the needle out. So there's another mechanism. There's a fourth mechanism where you actually implant into the point a gold bead. And that will stay in the acupoint forever, providing this pressure at that moment, and then staying in that acupoint forever. So those are four basic forms of acupuncture.
What health conditions can acupuncture address for dogs?
So one of the more common health indications is to relieve pain. That's where it has got its roots 1,000 years ago. That's where it was invented, so to speak, in China, and then moved into so many of the other Asian cultures, because Chinese acupuncture is different than Indian acupuncture, which is different than Japanese acupuncture, subtly different. The meridians are all the same. There's 361 points along 12 meridians that are paired. And they found that pain relief can be remarkable. It also is very effective in reducing inflammation. So inflammation caused by osteoarthritis or caused by what we call ischemia, something that's pressing on a nerve like a disc, or Something like hypoxia, not getting enough oxygen to a particular area of the body, may cause pain. So a second indication is inflammation, removing inflammation. It's also really very helpful in improving mobility. So if you have a decreased range of motion, acupuncture could be very, very helpful. It also enhances healing by releasing endorphins. It can minimize discomfort as you're healing. It has a very interesting increase in respiratory function. It can be helpful in alleviating some side effects from cancer and some of the side effects of chemotherapeutic drugs. It's also really very, very commonly used in minimizing gastrointestinal discomfort. And you might see some people walking around with a wristband getting on a boat, and the wristband has a little button, and the button is pushing an actual acupoint that helps with seasickness or with nausea. And therefore, it just has a really general increased quality of life.
Is acupuncture painful for dogs?
I think part of what makes people painful is needle phobia. So dogs have no idea that you're doing this. The needles are so thin, and if you have a dog that is food motivated, and the way we do it oftentimes is we lie the dog down, and either a nurse or the mom or dad's at the front end, and we have this delicious treat, and they give them these little tiny pieces, and they're focused on the food, and they don't feel the needles. In general, I think the fear is with phobias, and they don't generally have that. Now, you could definitely have a needle causing some dog to be uncomfortable because you're putting a needle in. But it is, I think, more in the head than at the acupoint. And some people find it really very, very relaxing. I personally don't find it painful when I'm putting the needles in a patient. And the vast majority of clients, when they come in, especially for the first time, are more nervous that their pet is getting acupuncture because they're needle phobic, and how are they going to get through it. But the actuality is it's probably less painful for a dog than it is for a person.
Can acupuncture be used in combination with other treatments for my dog?
Most definitely. We use it in so many aspects of our rehabilitative mechanisms. But the interesting thing about acupuncture, whether you're coming in for an injection of an anti-inflammatory, or whether you're coming in to have hydrotherapy for improved range of motion, or whether you're coming in to go into hyperbarics because you're reducing ischemia or hypoxia for some neurological manifestation, or post-op from a neurosurgery. The thing that I like to do with acupuncture is I like that to be done last. So you can come in for a lot of different modalities, but the thing that acupuncture should be done, and then they should drift off like on a magic carpet and not have another mechanism where they're being restrained and having another thing done. So I always try to do acupuncture last, regardless of what other modalities of treatment they're having that day.
How can my dog benefit from acupuncture?
He's going to benefit from so many of the mechanisms that it's positive for: pain relief, reduced inflammation, improved mobility, minimizing gastrointestinal nausea effects. But you have to remember that if you understand the nature, and I'm going to take a minute to give you a little story. of why it works, and it's something that I compare it to, which will give you a little bit of a light bulb. So if you imagine a side of a mountain filled with pine trees that they are cutting down and sending to the lumber yard, the trees get sliced down and they slide down the mountain, and they all enter into the river, and they're all flowing down the river towards the mill. That is chi floating through a meridian. That is the life source floating through the river of life. Suddenly, one of those trees turns and creates a log jam. That log jam, in traditional Chinese medicine, is called stagnation. And everything upstream from that log jam is now not moving. That creates pain. That's what is so uncomfortable. Stagnation is what you're trying to alleviate with acupuncture, one of the big events. So now imagine you take a helicopter and you go with a log hanging from a chain, and you go right over the log jam. And you drop that log right into the middle of the log jam, and it goes poof, and it starts to rearrange all the different blocked logs, and they start to flow. And that is the essence of what acupuncture does to stagnation in a meridian point.
Who is qualified to perform veterinary acupuncture?
Only a veterinarian is qualified to perform veterinary acupuncture. They then should take a certification program that teaches them the art of acupuncture, and then they can perform acupuncture. There are human acupuncturists who perform acupuncture on people's pets, but it's much more of a friendly understanding, as it would be if I, as a veterinary acupuncture, were to put needles into a human. I do it to my friends, my family that want to have it done, because what's interesting about acupuncture is that there are basically 361 points. These points travel along 12 paired meridians. And I like to compare the meridians to 12 extension cords. And each extension cord is plugged in to each other, and then they're twisted. And along those extension cords are 361 very, very specific points, and each one does something completely different. And each point is about the size of a nickel. How many different places in the size of a nickel can you put a hair needle? Quite a lot. And it's very, very different. It's almost impossible for me to choose 50 points that I'm going to use on a dog, because the points are very, very important in deciding what you're going to be doing based on the diagnosis. But I could see that dog 10 times, and every time I put that point into bladder 18, do you think I'm hitting exactly where that point went every single time? No. Acupuncture is like painting by the numbers. You can have 10 people with a canvas, each one using the same color in the same space, and you look at the paintings, they're all going to be different. So it really is in the hand of the artist who's doing it that creates the end game and the end result. So a veterinarian who's licensed is someone who will provide acupuncture in a dog or a pet.
How frequently will my dog need to receive acupuncture treatments?
That also depends upon what we're treating. There are patients that come in that might have had a sprain or a strain. We can do acupuncture once and they can leave and they can feel fabulous. And there could be patients that are coming in that had back surgery that need rehabilitation over the next 6 months, and they would benefit from having acupuncture once, twice, even 3 times a week. So it depends upon what we're trying to accomplish. But again, it is based on the response that the patient gets and the perception that the client sees.
What dogs are good candidates for acupuncture?
I think all dogs are pretty good candidates. I don't look at it as a candidate, but in my hand, what I find is neurological cases, back pain cases, arthritic cases, joint disruption cases, post-operative cases, spinal cord disease cases, intervertebral disc cases, brain trauma cases. I think many of the neurological painful cases I find are really, really going to experience a pretty good end game result. Acupuncture was designed 1,000 years ago, and a true acupuncture would have evaluated a patient and would have treated almost anything, along with concoctions of Japanese remedies or Chinese remedies. But there are points for almost every ailment. And the way they would manifest the next visit is if they improved, they would use the same points. And if they didn't, they would change them.
Are there any dogs who should not receive acupuncture treatments?
Yes. Acupuncture should not be given to any patient, dog, human, that's pregnant. Because there are certain points that could have an effect on the pregnancy. No patients should get it that have bleeding disorders, hemophiliacs, things of that nature. And no patients should get acupuncture, especially electric acupuncture, if they are seizure patients, because the electrical conductivity could elicit a seizure. You also want to make sure that the patient doesn't have any electrical implanted devices like pacemakers. Those individuals shouldn't have them, and you stay away from patients with cancer.
What are the alternatives to acupuncture if it's not suitable for my dog?
There's so many different modalities that we call complementary, from homeopathy to massage therapy to acupressure, where you're using the points but you're not actually puncturing with the needle. So there are Reiki therapy, which is energy healing. There are so many alternative complementary treatments that may be beneficial. One of the ones that I use a lot is hyperbaric oxygen, laser, massage therapy.
Are there any risks or negative side effects of canine acupuncture that owners should know about?
The risks we talked about, no pregnancy, dogs that are having seizures, the mechanisms that we talked about as far as those things that are contraindicated, blood disorders, but it's a pretty safe modality, pretty much, for most of the patients that we see. You always can find a way to treat pretty much everything. My results are more in the neuro cases, but there's not a lot of contraindications, but except for the few that are really mandated.
How much does a veterinary acupuncture treatment cost?
So there's a wide variety. I mean, you probably are going to spend anywhere between $70, $75, $80, upwards of $200. It depends upon what you're doing. It depends upon the time, depends upon the size, depends upon the duration, how many needles are you putting in. Those are kind of complementary to the price, but not expensive.
What can I expect from my dog during an acupuncture session?
Probably the way it actually works is the needles are placed. Once we make the patient comfortable, the needles are placed, and if we're adding electroacupuncture, then we connect to the electroacupuncture access, and then the needles stay in for about 15 minutes. Most of the time, I wind up leaving because I find that the patients are much more comfortable after the guy who's standing behind them, tweaking them, is out the door, and the vast majority of them go to sleep. On the electroacupuncture tables or the floors where we do them on the blankets, there is a beeping sound that's connected to the amplitude and the frequency of the stimulation on the electro side. And as it ends, there's a Chinese song that plays that they kind of wake up, and that means the needles come out.
How can I tell if acupuncture is effective for my dog?
You're going to see it. You're going to see a dog that is stiff and uncomfortable walk out of here with a kick in a step, a change. Part of the reason that modern science believes that it works is that the needles, when they go in, release these micro doses of endorphins, which are Mother Nature's natural anesthetics. So even if it didn't solve the problem, it created a blood level increase of a natural anesthetic that makes them feel better. And that very well may be what it does, because the needle sometimes is not going to change a severe osteoarthritis, bone rubbing on bone issue. It's going to make them feel better.
How does acupuncture benefit senior dogs or those with chronic conditions?
For the same exact way. Again, it's going to decrease pain. If you decrease pain, you're going to increase range of motion because you're going to feel better when you take a walk. Increasing your range of motion is going to stretch you out because the end plates, the end marks that your range of motion was restricted by, is now extended. So you don't feel as much pain. So your gait can improve. And if the gait improves, you're extending your painless stride. And it's really obvious in people who have a positive experience. Not every case is going to be positive to acupuncture, but the vast majority of them will.
What should I do if my dog is anxious about acupuncture treatments?
Your dog won't be anxious about the acupuncture treatment, you will. And again, food motivation is the best mechanism to take their minds off the fact that somebody's standing behind them. However, if we really believe that the acupuncture treatments are going to be really beneficial, we might pre-med them with some mild anti-anxiety medications like a little bit of gabapentin prior, or even some trazodone, just to take the edge off so that they can get the benefit of the treatment.
Are there any home care or follow-up instructions after an acupuncture session?
You know, oftentimes the client will watch where the points are, and I will tell them that they can actually massage their dog. It's called tuina, the art of Chinese massage, in the same point areas that we are putting needles into. And the pressures of those points can really be beneficial. So acupressure using the points that are designed for that dog just with your fingers can be really, really beneficial. And that's something that you could do at home. So if you have any questions about veterinary acupuncture for your pets, please give us a call at Calusa Veterinary Center, 561-999-3000.